Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is Corey Edmund Engerlot. Welcome to You Are the Question, the show where I ask my fellow people, my fellow guests. Today we have a great guest. His name is Keith Knight, somebody who's producing a lot of content about a lot of concepts you probably never heard of before, or concepts that go deep into the subjects that perhaps you've heard before. But we're looking into natural law, we're looking into voluntarism, we're looking into all the aspects of freedom. And how we actually attain freedom, well, we're going to talk about that. So, You Are the Question. This is a show on the One Great Work Network. I want to thank onegreatworknetwork.com. So please visit that if you want to see more live streams like this, more shows like this. There's plenty of different content creators. We're a collective of individuals who are content creators and teachers alike, seeking to open the minds of people, help bring awareness to universal concepts and ideas such as the natural law. And what is this show? Well, you're the question. Therefore, I am also the question. We, by our actions that are to be at question, help determine the world we live in. So by questioning ourselves, our condition, our actions, we question how we can help make the world a better place together. This is a show where we seek answers present for us all by nature. The world depends on you. Where you stand, you are the question. The objective of the show is to teach others one-on-one natural law directly and practically. Therefore, this guest today, who already has a lot of expertise in this knowledge of natural law, may be able to offer a lot of helpful advice or tips and recommendations, book recommendations, whatever you see it. He has content on everything. He produces content like crazy. He has a YouTube channel. I believe it's called Keith Knight. Do Not Tread on Me. Is that correct, Keith Knight? How's it going?
Tread on anyone
Don't tread
is
on
the
anyone. There you go.
is the principle. Don't tread on me. You see, it's very often used by friends of ours who wave the Gadsden flag, very into maybe smaller government, maybe a night watchman state they advocate. However, the principle of don't tread on me is something that Joseph Stalin believed in, and Ted Bundy, and Harry Truman, and all the evil people
Mm,
of the world. So don't tread on me. Not the highest bar that I want to
okay.
go for. What is impressive is if you take
Right.
that principle of, well, I don't want to be treaded on, so therefore I should extend that to my neighbor. And, well, just because someone lives in close proximity doesn't mean they deserve extra rights than someone who happens to be far away. So don't tread on anyone. And yes, I'm on YouTube, but I'm also on 18 platforms. I got 2 strikes on YouTube, so I'm trying not to put any more eggs in that basket. I am on Odyssey.com.
Yeah, awesome. It's actually kind of funny I made that mistake because you're totally right on that. A lot of people think, well, I'm the exception to the natural law that exists that says, hey, we are equal. We are given the equal rights by God. They say, hey, I'm the exception. I get the right to rule over somebody, and somebody has the moral obligation to obey me. And we have this sort of relationship anytime we see the government systems of today, or people think it's legitimate, or they think maybe it's legitimate because they have a voice in the say, right? They have a vote to give, and it's democracy. So they're the government, right? They get to make the decisions, and they are the ones who put in the politicians. The government was employed by them. They hired the government. So what do you say to those people?
Well, but we have to differentiate between hiring an accountant and hiring a politician. When you go to your accountant and say, I'm a mess, I need you to take care of my money. Then we go to our dietitian and say, God, I eat like trash. I need you to set up a meal plan for me. And then we go to our technician and say, I don't know how the hell I work this laptop. Please fix it for me. In all of those 3 examples, technician, dietitian, accountant, what we are doing is taking something we have the right to, our money, any justly acquired property through voluntary exchange or original appropriation. We're taking that and we're delegating what we have a right to someone else on the condition that if this contract is violated, either party would have the right to opt out. What this does is it makes us equals in authority. So while he has an expertise in accounting, technology, being a dietitian, I'm not sure what that field of study would be called. Both of us still, even with our ranges of expertise, still have the right to opt out of engaging in interacting with the other one. When it comes to government, This is what Hans Hermann Hoppe referred to as the alchemy of statism. He usually mentioned it to the monetary system, but we can also see this with the state. So I don't have the right to go around issuing taxes to people, or else I promise you, I I got some people. I know exactly who. I'd go around and tax them at 100%. They're all in Washington D.C. And however, I don't have the right to do this, but big caveat. I can vote for Kirsten Sinema in Arizona to issue taxes on my behalf. She doesn't have the right, and I don't have the right, but together we have the right. 0 times 0 actually equals 1, or 0 plus 0 equals 1, rather. So this is not a legitimate form of delegating a right. In the same way, I would delegate access to my house for the carpenter. In all of those previous cases, I had the right to delegate something. In this case, I clearly don't have the right. So when it comes to, well, what can the government do and what can't they do? Well, if you don't have the right to do it in the first place, you wouldn't have the right to delegate it to someone else. When it comes to the draft, if I don't have the right to force someone to perform labor against their will for me, then I don't have the right to vote for Joe Biden to do it on my behalf. If I don't have the right to commit mass murder, well, calling it war and saying, well, there was a process of voting is in principle no different than any other terrorist organization committing the action. So this ability to think rationally about what you have the right to delegate and what you don't have the right to delegate is the root of debunking the nonsense of we hired the government, therefore they are us and they are a representation of us. What they actually are is the most successful attempt at a mafia organization gaining a monopoly on ultimate decision making within a geographical area. So they're a gang with a flag, not our representatives.
Interesting. So what you're saying is you can't delegate a right that you don't have, right? And that sort of what man's law tries to do is override the natural law and saying, I can be God. I can decide the rules, and I'm going to back it by threat of violence. Regardless of who consents, if 99% of people agree and 1% doesn't, oh well, we got to push it on that 1%. That's democracy. And I think it's very dangerous that a lot of people have this mindset, because I know you and I are on the same wavelength with this. But I do open the conversation. I am interested in hearing people's thoughts on this. Like, where do you know how to define a right? And talking about this, because I think that's important when it comes to discussing these rights. We're using this term a lot. We're using the term natural law a lot. We're using some terms that people may have never learned before in school. They were never taught it. So where do you think what would you say is the first step for somebody on their learning process when it comes to understanding these subjects? What do you think is a general good step for somebody who is interested, they do care, they want to learn, and so they want to take the step into learning this knowledge? Where do they start that you suggest?
One of the first places to start with anything is to define your terms. Because by not defining your terms, like representation, it allows you to be led astray in ways you otherwise wouldn't if you know what you're talking about. So sometimes the term like socialism or left wing, well, depending on who you're talking about, whether it's Frederick Bastiat, I'm, a total leftist in agreement with Frederick Bastiat, but I'm not with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Exactly. Yeah. Bastiat wrote a great book, The Law. He also wrote Economic Harmonies. He was in opposition to the French monarchy, which was on the physical right. Therefore, it put him on the left. So if you just have buzzwords like, well, Biden is against Trump, who's on the right, therefore Biden's on the left. Well, just finding your identity as an anti-leftist or an anti-socialist or whatever, that does not get to the root of the issue. So one of the main things you need to do is be able to define your terms, or maybe even superior to defining is having a general understanding with regard to what people are talking about. So when it comes to a right, even though I kind of have a different definition than a lot of people, I would say one Well, one definition I find superior than an action that does not cause harm to another sentient being is, I would say, a right is probably an action that is morally justified insofar as it does not initiate aggression or fraud against a peaceful person. So, whereas harm, I think, might be a little too vague. Some of the biggest, harms in life, people getting fired from their job, losing customers if you're an employer, someone breaking up with you, someone divorcing you, your kids, being distant. Those are some of the biggest. I'm not trying to equivocate and say and misuse the concept of harm, but if we have a right as something as any action that's morally justified insofar as it does not initiate fraud or aggression, violating the self-ownership principle of individuals, then there's just no way we can go astray. Even if we disagree on the technicality, we're not going to come to such different worldviews that one of us justifies totalitarianism and slavery, and the other believes in only voluntary exchanges between consenting adults. First place to start is defining your terms, knowing what you're talking about. Almost you have to do this with every conversation because people have such different concepts. So governance versus government versus the state. Those three. Governance could simply be the rules of conduct by which individuals engage in norms and practice routines. So we have governance at the One Great Work Network. Whereas government, you might say, has larger scale policies, or you might say the etymology of the word is to control the mind, and that's what government is. Or the state is a monopoly on violence, where some people claim the right to rule, with the right to rule people who have not contracted with them on property they haven't justly acquired. So if you are able to grasp those concepts, or even ask people, what do you mean when you say socialism? Well, I mean people sharing things. What the hell is wrong with sharing and charity? Nothing's wrong with that at all. It's also good because it allows people to keep their identity. So you can say, "Oh yeah, I was actually part of a commune once." So I have a one up on a lot of communists that I talk to. I say, "Hell yeah, I was in one." The great part was being able to opt out, and a lot of other people being able to opt out if they didn't appreciate it. Nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah, consent.
So that is the first step, finding your definitions. Second, I would say picking up books. I'll let you comment on that, and let me just think of a couple books real quick.
Sure. I like how you take things from
were you
multiple
gonna say something?
perspectives. Yeah, I like how you take things from multiple perspectives. You're looking at all the different people who look at these terms in many different ways, but how we can also understand the same truths through different perspectives. This is one of the reasons why I actually made a presentation recently called Unnatural Law, which looks at the total polar opposite of natural law, but it's looking at the same truths just through a different perspective. So that way people don't generalize and always put everything through the banner of natural law and say this is, how everything must be always according to. Because we can understand these truths and get more specific, like you did when you came to define a right. And you said, no, it's an action that doesn't harm, a peaceful being who's doing nothing wrong. Like you got very specific on who is being attacked, who is the aggressor and who isn't, who's being breached upon and who isn't. So it's knowing that key difference, that objective difference, which a lot of people might not see as objective to begin with. So we're battling a lot of different things when it comes to the knowledge, but I do see that the world is moving toward a scenario where a lot of people are starting to feel the same way, that there's this unsettledness, this uncomfortableness with what's going on. So you can list the books that you have if you like, but I also have another question for you after you do that.
Okay, so yeah, well, once you're in the habit of either having definitions, concepts, understandings in your own head, or you're able to ask people, you're comfortable saying, well, before we start this, I don't want to argue about something for 30 minutes, because if you don't have the same starting point, of course you're going to be talking over each other's heads.
Right.
Once that's done, I think that there's so much great literature on these topics. The amazing thing is how many different people came to the same conclusion with different starting points. That is why certainly our position would be justified as natural law, because no matter what side of the planet you're on or what time you're born in, if you have one coconut and another, you're going to realize that this is two coconuts or two pears or something. So anyone engaging in logic and the law of non-contradiction, understanding the world as it really is going to come to the same conclusion. So some of the big ones are a lawyer who tried competing with the U.S. Postal Service. I think it was called the American Mail Service. A guy named Lysander Spooner in the 1850s, I think, wrote a book called No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority. Now, what he does is he, as a lawyer, basically questions the concept, the legitimacy of a constitution, certainly pushing things in the right direction. Of course, with all these great minds, you can find a great number of shortcomings. For example, he believed in intellectual property, which is an illegitimate concept, which claims which violates property rights at the expense of the concept that, well, I believe in the labor theory of value. If I work for it, I therefore own everything that comes at the result of it. Shortcoming. However, what he does is he says, this concept of an agreement, it actually never took place, that we all agreed to have a government. In reality, government is established by the few, and these few assume the consent of the rest. That is the equivalent of, even if everyone at that time agreed, yes, this is a constitution and it's the greatest, most beautiful poem I've ever read. Every one of these amendments is perfect. If everyone agreed and they signed it, well, then that would be binding on them. It's the equivalent of saying, yeah, my great grandkids owe you $1 million. Well, what the... That is not a legitimate form of contract between consenting adults. So all he did was take English common law and apply it to the politicians. Getting in that habit is just brilliant, whether it's in your personal relationships or business relationships or to the state is so valuable. Another guy named Michael Huemer wrote a book called The Problem of Political Authority. This is a little more advanced.
Okay.
What he does is he gets you in the routine of thinking consistently of, all right, so me and we have this charity called the Red Cross. Is it okay for them to take money by force so long as they use it to benefit people? Or how about, people like the One Great Work Network? They do a lot of great beneficial stuff. They provide tons of education that anyone can access for free. Do they have the right to force people to chip in because people benefit? And the answer, of course, is no. People still have the right to opt out, regardless of whether you think it's beneficial for them in the short run or long run. Then how is it any different if, a guy named Joe Biden and a girl named Kamala Harris, well, why do they get this right? No one else has this right except this group right here. Yeah. Why is that the case? And what you're essentially doing is you're flipping the burden of proof on its head. So while people say, well, you believe in this concept of anarchism and natural law, prove your case to me. What you do in a matter of seconds with the work of Michael Huemer is you're able to say, I'm not the crazy one. You're the one with the blatant double standard. No one has the right to do it except for this group. By the way, this group you commonly call liars, cheats, self-interested, greedy people. All the time. So Huemer does a great job at that. Book Anatomy of the State is a great introductory essay by Murray N. Rothbard. This is a PhD from University of Nevada, Las Vegas. This Anatomy of the State article is just such a red pill for anyone trying to get an understanding of what the state is. The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose is a great book. He really gets into the concept of if you don't have a right, how can you delegate it? He wrote a summary of that book called What Anarchy Isn't, and it's like a 20-page little pamphlet. I bought 40 of them for, I think, $20. The Use and Abuse of Logic by Madsen Prairie is a collection of logical fallacies that really gets you thinking consistently. So you're much less likely to be manipulated by propaganda. Also, there's a really big book titled Knowledge, Reality, and Value, a mostly common sense guide to philosophy by Michael Huemer. And what I did was I read the 9 most important pages in that book, and I put it in a video format titled, it's on the One Great Work Network. I think I titled it 14 propaganda tactics used by the corporate press. Once you get those logical fallacies down, the likelihood of you getting manipulated, goes to, extremely small levels. Stefan Molyneux has made some excellent contributions. Practical anarchy, how anarchy can work in the real world, and everyday anarchy,
These are
the
great.
anarchy that we already experience.
Yeah.
So those two are just brilliant, very affordable. You can find them online. The Law by Frederick Bastiat is great because you have this guy in 1850 coming up with ideas that if that book were published today, such a quick read. The sections are nice and short. You can read like one a day for 2 or 3 minutes, and within a month or so, you'll be finished with it. You could use that as a coffee table book.
There's
So
even
it's
a
great to
children's
see.
book made out of that one. Yeah, have you seen that one?
I've read that.
Yeah.
Yeah, by the Tuttle twins.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And then finally, A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism by Hans Hermann Hoppe gets you thinking in concepts rather than buzzwords. Because if we think of, I'd mentioned socialism, just sharing, nothing wrong with that. Or if there's a place, the people who are there more than everyone else, the everyday employees, they should be the ones who own the stock in it. There's nothing wrong with that at all. We have Winco in Arizona. That's employee-owned company. We have Cruise America in Arizona, also a fine organization. But so long as people have the right to opt out,
Yes.
then you're actually then you have something that's morally justified. You can also see the shortcoming with not allowing people to opt out, because then it stops. If I have the right to own a part of this company, well, then I have the right to sell that share to someone else. But then that violates the abolition of private property principle that a lot of socialists believe in. So instead of getting you to think in buzzwords, what Hoppe does is he says communism, defined by Karl Marx in 1848, was the abolition of private property. Socialism is the institutionalized aggression against private property and private property claims. And capitalism would then be a social system based on the explicit recognition of private property and non-aggressive contractual exchanges between private property owners. Those are the only principled differences when you're trying to get to the essence of an idea. So you can say, well, a lot of greedy people tend to be in this group called the capitalist group. Well, there's a lot of greedy people in all demographics. Right. A lot of socialists are greedy. Are politicians not greedy as well? Are communists who want to confiscate trillions in property? Isn't that more greedy than anything?
Because money is that religion.
An entrepreneur? Exactly. So if you have this principled understanding, or maybe you think different words are better fit, if you have a principled understanding where you could approach these concepts as opposed to buzzwords, then Hoppe's book is right for you. I think all those should be on Odyssey.com. I would go as far as to say I have them all on the One Great Work Network in my collection there, because I know that every time I catch them on Odyssey, I put them on my channel there for people to access.
Right. That's why you were the perfect person to ask that question with. You recommended some really good books. A lot of them I've read myself, but I think they really just help give a greater perspective to this, so that we don't just like watch one thing and say this is what everything should be about. If we look at a multitude of different sources from a multitude of different people, we can understand the truth in many more clear and specific ways. And we can understand it within our own lives too, which I think is also very important, since these are universal concepts. Something a lot of people mention a lot is like, this is your opinion, this is your worldview, and you can have yours, I'll have mine. But the problem is they don't realize that the very existence of politics and government, as we speak, do the very thing that we say we don't want them to do, which is push their opinions upon everybody else. That is what they create through their form of law. So, people may say, oh, well, you have an opinion about anarchy and freedom and voluntarism. Well, we're not pushing our ideas on other people. We're seeking to educate people so they can live their lives as they choose, as long as they do not harm others, as long as they do not breach upon other people's rights, as we mentioned. So, as society is moving toward a lot of ways that many people instinctually, I think, feel is going down a downward spiral, if you may see. There's a lot of things going on in the world. People are starting to wake up and see, oh, something's not right. I don't know what it is, perhaps, or I don't know how it got here. Maybe we just need to restore the Constitution or whatever. People are going to jump to those types of solutions. And we're saying, well, hey, let's look at the full picture first. Let's look at these other ideas that we're talking about here. Do you see a collapse imminent in our near future? And what do you recommend people do to prepare for that? And how would this scenario help people like us trying to get information out there? Does this help us learn from history like we do for the truth? To understand so we can move forward in the future, saying, this is what been through, this is how we got here, we need to prevent it for the future. What do you have to say about a collapse scenario?
As much as I always feel one coming because the psychopaths that have, so much power and influence and never apologize for being wrong in the future is just so obvious that they have bad motives and they really don't care if anything happens. So the likelihood of this, said collapse happening, very likely. However, say that, we were in 1775. Well, there's a revolution and tons of people are dying and there's going to be a change in government. God knows what's going to happen. Well, what if we're in 1861? There's going to be a civil war killing 500,000 people. It's like, well, that is total collapse. There's going to be a Spanish-American war. Now the U.S. is turning imperialist. It's all over for us. There's going to be a world war twice. I mean, it can always look like things are, just right close to collapse. Of course, there was a Cold War, seconds away from nuclear exchange. The Vietnam War, of course, the war on terrorism. The war for terrorism. But the same concept can always apply. When you're in the midst of something, it can always seem like the worst thing ever. But after time goes by, you go, well, hey, we lived through the Civil War and the World Wars and all this other, and the Black Plague and all this other nonsense. So maybe things will be okay. Regardless of how bad things get, whether things are going to be totally normal or totally beautiful or totally terrible, under any situation, you'll still want to have a solid group of friends. What this does is it increases your ability to access the division of labor. Well, first of all, find meaning in life and enjoy life with other people. But second of all, the division of labor is so important because the more friends you have, the more people that are able to lean on you. You specialize in something and then trade with everyone else. If you have a good network of people, well, then you're going to be able to solve the problems in life, which increases the likelihood you'll want to achieve your ends. So something like money. I want to make a lot of money. Well, money is the medium or, temporary justification for the ultimate end, access to resources, microphones, computers, food, air, water, shelter, oxygen. If you're, a seasteader, you're going to need access to a lot of oxygen. But what you're doing by building a network is increasing the likelihood you'll be able to cooperate with other people in mutually beneficial ways. So whether there is or is not some terrible collapse, you'll still be able to achieve your ends in life. Because the goal is not money. That is putting the cart before the horse. You could have had all the money in the world dropped on planet Earth in the year 1000, and no one would have been better off. So it's not the money. It's the ability to use your mind to mix your labor with the resources of the world and trade with others in a socially cooperative method that allows us to achieve our ends. So my biggest thing is getting a network of friends and developing a skill, something you can specialize in, whether it's food growing. My good friend Sal the Agorist wrote a great book called Anti-Politics. He says, big three are be your own bank, have Bitcoin. Second is grow your own food. And the third is, oh my God, it has totally skipped my mind. Be your own bank, grow your own food, and get a 3D printer. He actually sells them at 3dprintergoburr.com with Burr with 3 R's. So there we actually have real world solutions. You don't have to say, I can't wait for Pelosi to change her mind and step down from office. You don't have to wait. First of all, if you want to wait, you are going to die before the psychopaths admit they're wrong. So do what is in your immediate control. Like, I love talking about how evil the Federal Reserve is and what a blatant scam it is. My next video, or two videos, are going to be on Hans Hoppe's analysis of just the scam of fractional reserve banking. And he's just like, if I explain this to you without all the propaganda, it's the most wild thing ever. So having a good network of friends, good relationships is probably the best shield against any potential collapse.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I mean, with people, you can do anything. Regardless of money, especially in the scenario of a financial collapse where money becomes what? Useless, fiat, paper currency. So perhaps it would be better to have people with you who know how to live off the land, who know how to get water and do fires. I mean, people may not know how to do these simple things. Again, the same things like what we're talking about, this is also not taught in school, is preparing ourselves. And to what extent do you think preparing ourselves is essential for our freedom? Putting it into action, saying, in order for me to get out of the system of slavery, I need to grow my own food. I need to, do all this. Is that necessary, do you think, for humanity to free itself, is to say, hey, we can live self-sustainable away from the government and let's show other people how we can do it. So let's be the change.
Yeah, I think it's so vital because it will often show people the alternative that they don't know exists. So they might say something like, well, obviously we need a welfare state, and obviously we need the state to monopolize and coercively fund compulsory education. How else are people going to get educated? Well, you can give them the moral response of, well, I educate people. Do I have the right to enslave children en masse? Well, of course not. But still, that's really hard for people to sink their teeth
Hmm.
into. When you show them Montessori, when you show them, here are 50 PDF links to books that will blow your mind. Well, how do they get to reading in the first place? Well, you could show them parents teaching their kids how to learn in those videos. So once you see real world examples, then it goes from theory to reality very
Hmm.
quick. And that relationship then becomes complementary. So where you could say, well, there's the theory, but that's in opposition to the real world. Once you're able to put those two in sync, so they're actually in harmony, well then but people are much more likely to accept things. The biggest one would be 3D printing or trading goods and services, either through a gift economy method, where it's like, hey, I really like that guy looks very cool, building something and then distributing it without asking for anything in exchange. I want to be that guy. I want my social status to be that of someone who has a talent and a skill and doesn't even charge people. That's so cool. Well, then maybe that's your social currency, like a voluntary social credit score kind of thing. I mean, how's the state gonna tax the gift economy or the barter economy? I think gift is more logical than barter economy. But whatever, maybe I'm wrong. So what? Build a network. Show me I'm an idiot. Doesn't really matter. I think it's so important because it puts a real it brings into harmony the theoretical with the real world. So yes, I think it's very important.
Yeah, yeah, I think it is important that that people start looking at what could happen in the near future to themselves. I mean, it's important people stay present too, and look at what they can do, and maybe start getting ready now if they haven't. But it's always important that they have people and that they do look into some of these resources because it could help them out, like you mentioned, and really help open their worldview more than perhaps the standard left right and this is how things are black and white scenario, because we've seen time and time again, like you mentioned, in history where we've had wars, where we've had collapses, where we've had all these scenarios. So that's why I figured to mention it. It's like we're talking among those lines of, are we repeating history? There's nothing new under the sun. So let's look at what has happened and move forward so we can be prepared. So I have talked a lot on my channel. I'm not sure if you've looked into a lot of my own resources. A lot of my stuff is very action oriented. So I created a movement called Nature is the Answer, so we can sort of help bring this knowledge to people. And so what I would do, for example, is I have this one page on the website where I could send people to all these books that you talk about. It doesn't have all the books that you talk about, but it has some of the ones that I think are important. Like, for example, like the natural law documentary that's coming out. I think that's probably going to be good for the average person to look at and say, hey, I'm new to natural law. I could watch this documentary. There's Mark Pastor's natural law seminars. There's Larkin Rose's Most Dangerous Superstition book. There's Lysander Spooner and some of his stuff, like you mentioned. I have some of his books on there. I actually created summary sheets for every single subject on natural law as well. I have question sheets and test sheets if people want to test themselves. There's many resources that I provided, but I put it all on one page. That way I could say, hey, if you want to teach someone this, or you want someone to look into this knowledge, here's one page and it has everything you need to know. So like I use the website and I use the movement as a means to amplifying our individual voices and saying, well, we're together in this, and it's not to make ourselves, separate from the crowd, or, we're special because we have this or that. No, it's simply to educate people, and that is the sore intention. So when I say unity, I mean, people understanding this knowledge, multiple people, all having the same knowledge, and then moving that forward into the world. And I consider it a natural process of change, because when you introduce knowledge, and if there exists truth within, the truth always rises above. So I see to it that, well, over time, as the truth gets out to more and more individuals, more people will put it into application, since they have the knowledge to put it into action, and therefore the world will change sort of naturally, as long as this knowledge keeps getting more and more present to people. Because the problem that I see is the knowledge isn't really present for people to begin with. Where do they find this idea of voluntarism? And it's not even been introduced to them. They've never heard of it before. So at least if we have it out in the public scene where it is accessible, people can find it for themselves, and they can look into it. The people who do care will always be the ones who look into it the most, who speak on behalf of it. So when it comes to action, what do you think of that? The idea that I created as a movement, any questions? I want you to challenge me on this if you see fit. If you see any problems with this, because I well suspect that in a collapse scenario, there's going to be many people who are very dependent on the government to say, I need help, help me now, and I don't know what to do. And maybe you're right, they could die off, and some of the people who survive will be the ones to live on. But I don't like to think in terms like that. I like to think, okay, people can emerge stronger, but we need to be there as a present solution, alternative to the government. That way they don't just look at the government solution and just go with that as their only option. So, hey, what's up? Coffee? Thanks. Appreciate it.
Coffee.
Mushroom coffee? Cool. So, thank you.
Keeps you talking. All right.
Yeah, thank you. Got enough drinks going on. I don't even have time to talk.
It's just like
I
on
mean,
TV,
time to drink all
I
this
need
stuff.
to get a servant like
I
that.
know, right?
Dang it.
I wish I could give this to you. But, so, yeah, talk about my 3-hour streams I'm going to be doing. It's going to be stuff like that. I'm just going to have people walking in. It's going to be like, okay, what's going on? But, yeah, so, but what was I talking about? So along the lines of a collapse, yeah, so, and stuff like that. I just think maybe we can use the scenarios of the world and what's going on in the world as a means to bring the knowledge to more people, because as more people grow more desperate, they're going to look desperate for more solutions. People are actually going to start to care, about what's going on in the world. And sadly, people don't learn from awareness, they learn from experience. So they might get hurt first before they start actually doing something. But if that is what helps them get to this process of truth, I guess life is just a learning process, is it? So what do you think of all this?
You know what? I love it. And, I'm so hesitant to criticize, even though no criticisms came to mind, with anything that, people are doing in our organization, so long as it's not, explicitly initiating fraud or violence against peaceful people. That's my standard. Everything else, I have no clue. I mean, one of the most important things to bring people to question their current standing is not just provide them with an alternative, but also to make them incredibly insecure about things they already believe in. So maybe just doing something on GMOs, maybe that's going to get people to question, what else have I been lied to about?
Right.
Well, and then they come across something like natural law, or, if you just say anarchy, that's so wild and bizarre and far out from anything that anyone ever sees. But if you say, Well, I always thought it was bizarre that some people thought the government was spying on everyone. And then Edward Snowden released the PRISM documents. It turned out it was all true, and nothing really changed, except the fact that they tried to go after him instead of the actual criminals committing the crime. So maybe talking about Edward Snowden will bring people to natural law,
Right.
or William Benny. I mean, I've talked to so many people to where, my original position was explain the non-aggression principle and self-ownership principle to as many people as possible. But the more I get messages from people, hey, this video really changed my mind on this topic. People usually commenting on one of my videos. I said, I wasn't even trying to spread the word of voluntarism in that video. How did they get it from that? So one guy recently said, your episode with David Friedman about legal systems very different from ours made me an anarchist almost instantly. And I said, what the hell? I got to watch this thing again. And all we did was talk about different types of legal systems. We didn't even talk about the self-ownership principle. And so I asked him, how so? And he had said something to the extent of, if you think there's one thing called the law, well, then it makes sense. Only one monopoly government issues the law, because anyone else doesn't have access to this one thing called the law. But then when you realize there are many different forms of legal systems, there's the Amish legal system,
Right.
and the Christian and the Jewish and the Muslim. There's polycentric law, there's monocentric law, there's traditional law. There is, all these types of monarchies, hereditary. There are oligarchies. There are tons of different contracts and mechanisms that people have used all around the world today, and places historically have used all these different ones. So once you realize there's no one official thing called the law, then you say, well, dear God, do I want one group monopolizing this thing called the law when there's so many different approaches? It's like, well, probably not. Even if you think they're the best people on earth, I think, my friends are some of the best people on earth. I don't want them having a monopoly over podcasting, because if they
Right.
do, they first of all don't have the knowledge, and they could probably get corrupted. Thinking
Yeah.
about it, I could already say, I'd really love to delete the Young Turks and really shove it in their face, and then and I already see myself going down the road to tyranny. So having the no double standard recognition is really important, and things like that, and making sure that we of course don't have a central plan as to get from a centrally planned society to a much
in
more
hell is
decentralized
happening?
voluntary one.
Yeah. Thank you, 7C class, for following, and so it's good that we have some people actually watching, and some people commenting actually on this video. So thank you to all you guys. And you mentioned some really good points, but yeah, I just
In hell
I
is
question, what could we do on a day-to-day basis, and you're right, you talk to a lot of people, and it's, they may not want to care, they may want to listen. Some people are already into it, they already looked into it, because if they care about it, they would look into it for themselves, right? They don't need somebody else to tell them. I don't want people to believe me, to believe anything that I'm saying. I want them to look into it for themselves, look into the resources, and come to understand it within their own life. And so I always recommend people at the end of the day, it's like, hey, here's the resources, look into it for yourself. I can't teach you these subjects ultimately. I could share with you, I could guide you, point you in the right direction, but ultimately you have to be the one to understand it, to comprehend it, and put it into action. So yeah, and C7 said very informative. Let's get it out there. So it's important that we do so. And do you think the best method is teaching online because it's the modern way of doing it, or is there other methods that people can go about doing it, especially with other people, like you mentioned before?
So I could certainly see it as being the most efficient use of your time, because with friends and family, I'm happy to sit down and explain myself. But when I have, 30 people asking me a day on Twitter and Facebook and email, I need to have links ready so I could say, best of luck, here's a link. I've already done all the work on whatever you're asking. Goodbye. So that sort of efficiency is valid. However, you have a lot of Christians who are simply motivated by people's ability to really bear the cost and be willing to, embarrass themselves or really say what they mean in person on a microphone in front of other people. So maybe that could convey a different sort of message. Oh, you have a podcast. Yeah, you and a billion other people. So maybe they're not. Maybe it's literally someone standing on the sidewalk with a megaphone saying the draft is literal slavery under the worst conditions. It's slavery plus getting shot at and PTSD and getting murdered. Do you not, ma'am, walking by, do you understand what I just
Yeah.
said? Maybe it's something like that, and then someone will put it on, and then it'll go viral.
Yeah.
Something.
You never know.
I'm so yeah, I definitely think it's so tempting to put everything online. Even when I was just reading a thing by Edward Stringham and Ben Powell about the contributions of Murray Rothbard and how he's like working with communists in the 60s against the anti-war movement. And then he's working with libertarians, of course, like Lou Rockwell and Ron Paul at the Mises Institute. And then he's working with Republicans in the 90s, like Pat Buchanan. I mean, it's like that guy is like, yeah, hey, let's give it a shot. As Frederick Douglass is, often quoted. I actually haven't seen an original source from this, but the general quote is, I will cooperate with anyone to do good and no one to do bad. So once you have that sort of principle, you can come up with all the ideas in the world. I certainly don't think there's only one method of getting people to really understand something. A lot of
Right.
people often have to find their identities
Right.
in something. So if someone is a really, really good 3D printer, well, that's probably going to do more to bring them to our side than handing them the 1,400-page manifesto on anarchism called Man, Economy, and State. I mean, as much as I'd love for everyone to read that, a lot of people are going to find their identity, see where it fits in, see how one group initiating violence against them is a huge hurdle to get them to achieve their ends. A lot of Uber drivers see things like, the state claiming a monopoly over all roads and transportation, and then having something like it's like $1 million to get a taxi medallion, and only they could do it. But then Uber comes along. Or think of how expensive it is to build a hotel, but then someone uses Airbnb. Once you start trying to regulate the Airbnb people, it doesn't matter how status they are, it's going to be in their interest to say, well, screw this. Well, if it's wrong for them to initiate aggression against me and regulate my peaceful, non-fraudulent voluntary exchanges, well, maybe I should apply this principle consistently. And very often it doesn't have to be direct. So, for example, you want a productive society? Teach a man to fish. Don't give him a fish. Well, to which Isaac Morehouse, the CEO and founder of Crash, which helps people get jobs without going through the university scam process, he says, well, instead of teaching a man to fish, what if I play a part in that role by helping make the net, by making the factory which produces the net, by driving trucks to the factory with the materials to make the net? You're still in that structure of production to getting the man to build the fish. So even if you are a lumberjack and you cut down wood, well, that wood could be used to make paper, to make books summarizing the work of Mark Passio, James Corbett, Larkin Rose, and people such as yourself. You can play a vital part in the production process all around. It does not have to be, well, are you making videos or are you not part of, us
Right.
trying to achieve this society? You can do it
Right.
in so many indirect ways. So say you work for the Postal Service, even though it's, a state organization. Well, those people know the town like no other. They walk around places, they meet people. Well, they have some of the biggest networks you could imagine.
Right.
So if we have, a postal worker, hey, between you and I know you're going to quit next week, and you're just going to get your pension. In every mailbox, I want you to put a copy of Larkin Rose's What Anarchy Isn't, 20-page little pamphlet. It's the greatest act of civil disobedience. It'll take more courage than anything I've ever seen a police or military member do. So hey, let's give that a shot. You can always find your contribution. It does not have to be, making videos online at all.
Yeah, that was great. Oh man, you make me inspired. But yeah, like, and that's why I've been starting up my own, real life group of people, and I've reached out to many different networks of people who are in politics and people who are from Freedom Cells, or people from all sorts of different organizations, and just bringing them together is one thing. And then saying, okay, what could we do is another thing. And I think, I also make that distinction in my truth to action video. It's like, it's one thing to know the truth and aspects thereof it, and another to go act on behalf of it. I think it's another whole scenario is understanding, well, what could I do? A lot of people ask is like, how do I record videos? How do I do this? And it's not about doing it because everyone else is doing it. It's about finding what is right for you, like you mentioned. And I think everybody has their creative pursuits somewhere at some time, and they could always do collaborations. We live in a world of technology. There's so much possibility, and that possibility came through due to the freedom that we have innately by the reality that is now, that is anarchy, everywhere around us. I think that is one misconception simply about anarchy right away is understanding it's some state that is some utopian dream away from what it is now, but that isn't. If we were to imagine it was some state, then it would be a government. But the fact that it is reality and is here all around us, it is what freedom is, essentially, external anarchy, then, that is understanding, okay, well, we're just human beings on this anarchic plane, and we can create order out of this natural chaos. And we should embrace the learning that we obtain from the world and understand that everything's teaching us to be self-responsible. When we have a government or a state always above our heads, it's teaching us, hey, you don't have to be self-responsible. You can just point at the police officer, he'll do it for you. Wait minutes away, even though things happen within seconds. Like, don't be responsible. Have other people take care of it for you. So I think everybody generally understands the main message that we're sending here, and I want people to check out all your works as well. So if you want to shout out all your channels, or if you have anything else to say, please feel free.
Yes, and just a final comment
Sure.
on what you just said. As Michael, oh my God, Michael Malice opens up his new book, The Anarchist Handbook, which, by the way, talk about a white pill. I have reason to be optimistic. It was #1 on all of Amazon in the nonfiction section
Wow.
for a day straight. Incredible stuff. His Anarchist Handbook, which I read, and it's legitimately a success. So it's not like it like the Anarchist Cookbook or something ridiculous tyranny advocating bullshit like that. What he says is anarchism is not a location, it is a relationship. So if your whole thing is, well, where am I now? Is there anarchy here on a large scale? Well, no. Well, then, I have no chance at anarchy. The only way it could be successful is if I go to the location where it is such and it's really big, then we will have won. Well, if that's your standard, you're never going to have it, realistically, or it's going to be a very long time, or it'll come at a high price. If you recognize anarchism, no rulers, as a relationship, treating people as equals with the ability to achieve your ends so long as you're engaged with people on a mutually beneficial, voluntary basis, well, then you can enjoy the anarchy in your everyday life, and it doesn't have to be maybe 1,000 years in the future. This idea in my head will come to fruition. Not at all. You don't have to wait for it. If you recognize that it's a relationship, you have your own boundaries, tell people what is justified, you then develop your own standards. I don't care what the church or the state says or what the tradition is. Here are my standards. I don't owe you any of my time. I don't owe you any of my money or my resources. And the same goes for you to me. So understanding that allows you to appreciate the present moment and not just live in, you know, Anarchyville in the future in your head as if it's Galt's Gulch.
Hmm.
As far as places to find me, the Libertarian Institute is where I work. All of us are voluntarists there. Scott Horton, Foreign Policy, Sheldon Richmond, Kyle Anzalone, Tommy Salmons, Pete Quinones, Patrick McFarlane. All of us are voluntarists at the Libertarian Institute. Great place to
Fantastic.
find a lot of work. Other than that, Odyssey.com is the best alternative to YouTube that I'm on, and Minds.com. So if you could take a couple minutes to subscribe to all your favorite people there, that is the biggest thing you can do to fight big tech. It might take 5 minutes to get an account on both. It's so easy That, I mean, if you're not willing to do that, just please just get out of
Yeah.
our way, or just don't pretend you're really raging against the machine if you can't take 5 minutes to do the most effective thing against big tech possible. So Odyssey and Minds are the best place, along with the Libertarian Institute. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's so great to see all these people going at the same mission here, for the same message here, which is, I believe it's nature is the answer. I believe it's, being self-responsible, self-voluntarism, like you mentioned, do not tread on anyone. These are and that flag
Yeah.
that is used for that message has been used since what, like 1776 or so, or maybe even early 1775. But it's funny. It's because it's also in yellow and black. I'm not sure if that's symbolic for voluntarism, but it's very cool to see something like that, through the generations. And what I did with my movement is I sort of created a flag too, and it has a website in the corner. So that way, when people use it, it's like, hey, here's a website, and it's always there. And if people use it through the generations, I look at it kind of like the do not tread on anyone flag. So we can move it ahead, and people look at it and they say, oh, well, this is where the knowledge is. And they can question, what is that? Why is there an NITA? Why is there a tree and a sun and all this? And why is that important in a world with so much technology and so much influence? And being a younger person and all these things happening in the world, I fear for my generations to come. So I'm looking ahead to those generations, and I'm gonna try to do as best as I can in real life, along with you, the viewer, anybody who's watching this video. Realize that we're all in the same boat here. We're not any special just because we're online talking about these ideas. We're just like you. We just simply have certain knowledge that maybe you don't, and you have knowledge that maybe we don't. So this is where we can create that complementary team. We can network, and we can create the change that we want to see in the world, create more conversations like this online at twitch.tv/coconuttv and on the onegreatworknetwork.com. Thank you very much, Keith Knight, for coming on to the show. Thank you.
Take care, brother.
You too. Take care.